I wanted to talk about speaking Japanese and Chinese in America. So I made some notes, as I always do. Can check them out. But I wanted to talk about the fact that my friend Achi, who's Japanese, has come to Philadelphia to visit me again for 2 weeks in the fall. And this is the 10th year in a row that he's come to visit me for 2 weeks in the fall in Philadelphia. So I'm quite happy for that. And one of the best parts about him coming is that I get to speak Japanese with him. And I remember when I first met him, I was in Japan and we were in Yamanashi because that's where he went to college. And we spoke Japanese from the beginning. He didn't speak English that well, so we ended up speaking Japanese naturally from the start. And although he's become able to speak English at a decent level over the last number of years, we still continue to speak in Japanese. I think this is quite common, is that the language that you end up speaking first tends to be the language that you stay in with that other person. Now, there are examples of cases where this is not true. I think it is possible to change the language that you use with someone. For example, I had a friend who did a master's degree in China, and he met his now wife in China, who is Japanese, and so the shared language that they had was Mandarin. So they ended up speaking Mandarin while they were dating over in China. However, when they moved together back to the US after getting married, they ended up speaking in English to each other, and now they only speak to each other in English because obviously his wife had the need to improve her English to be able to interact in American society. I think also Professor Arguez, he met his wife over in South Korea, and they spoke Korean when they were dating, but then when he started to move away from Korea into the Middle East, she realized that she needed to improve her English to be able to communicate with people. And so Professor Arguez started speaking to her in English to help her improve her English ability. But something I want to talk about is the world has changed in many ways to allow you to have your own bubble. And in the previous examples, you could say that you create your own bubble by having a partner who speaks the foreign language, perhaps. And this is a good way to get the foreign language into your world. But I remember when I was younger in high school, there was a bookstore named Borders. And I remember I thought it was so cool that they had foreign language newspapers. And I remember they had newspapers in Spanish and French, maybe German. I forget what the other languages were. But that was so cool to me because that was about the extent to which I had access to foreign languages in my life. The only way I could really get those languages into my world in a natural way was to go to the bookstore and pick up the newspaper that they had there. And I remember I was going to Japanese school on Saturdays, and I was so desperate to find real content in Japanese that I ended up trading a volume of manga, of a comic book, to a student in my class who had like a VHS tape that she received from her family in Japan, who would tape shows on TV and then mail the tape over to the US so she could watch on the VHS tape. And I remember I traded a Japanese manga volume to get one of her tapes just so that I could watch the show. By the way, back then in high school, I was selling Japanese manga online on eBay. I would buy hundreds of volumes of manga from Kinokuniya bookstores, which is a popular Japanese bookstore chain that has a location in New York and New Jersey. And so I made a deal with the manager at the time that I would get a discount if I bought in bulk, and then I would just sell them individually on eBay. And that was kind of my business at the time in high school. I would sell Japanese manga on eBay to everyone who was interested in that. So that was a fun business. But anyway, these days, it's so easy to get this foreign language content into your world because we have things like Netflix, where you can just go on and look at TV shows or movies in the foreign language. They often have subtitles that are readily available, not only in the language that you're watching in, but also translated into English or perhaps another foreign language that you're also learning. But even if you don't want to pay money for Netflix, there's even YouTube. You can just go to YouTube right now. I mean, you're watching YouTube, aren't you? You're watching me. And you can go on YouTube and search for foreign language content. And you'll find plenty of songs, plenty of vloggers, all kinds of podcasts, all kinds of content that you can watch in the foreign language. I find it interesting that we've created a world now where it's never been easier to make a bubble with you and the foreign language content in it. I think that's important, is that you want to create the world around you and design what is in your environments around you and create what you interact with. I think it's very easy for us to think about life in the world as something that we just happen to be in, and it's kind of this concrete and distinctive entity that we believe that we just allow ourselves to exist in. But it's actually the world that we have is what we interact with our bodies and our minds, what we tend to perceive. And so for that reason, you want to intentionally create your own world, the things that you perceive that make up what you are. And what that means is, if you're studying foreign languages, you want to get the foreign language into your life, and you want to perceive the foreign language, and you want to touch it. So for me, what that means is that, of course, as you know, I study every day 8 languages, and that's how I get it into my life, is that I'm always touching it at least a little bit every day for all 8. And other ways I can do it is I can have friends or people that I speak to in the foreign language, and that's a good way to get a real life application and make it a part of my universe. You can read books, you can watch movies, listen to podcasts when you're driving around in your car or when you're on the train on your commutes. The more times that you can interact with the foreign language and perceive it with your mind, that's going to increase the readily available amounts of the foreign language in your world, and that will make you better at the language. But I think what's important to note here is that you need to be aware of what you're putting into your world or your bubble or into you. And it's very important that you select the healthy things, the things that you know are going to help you, and stay away from the toxic things. You might want to think about it such as eating food. For example, you don't want to eat too much junk food or too much food that's unhealthy. Similarly, you don't want to ingest too much unhealthy contents from the world around you. I think the most common example that comes to my mind right now is perhaps the news. Sometimes the news doesn't always portray things in the healthiest way. It's trying to act on your emotions, perhaps in a negative way, in a fearful way, or perhaps a slightly toxic way. And I'm not saying that you should never watch the news, but you should be aware of it, and you might want to lower your consumption of it if you feel like it's affecting you. Just as I say, you shouldn't ignore the poison or toxic food around you. That doesn't mean that you still want to keep it in mind so that you don't end up ingesting too much of it. It's okay to interact with it, but you also want to keep a balance so that it doesn't affect you and throw you off balance or off center. And so that's what I have to say, is that you want to intentionally create your universe, your world. And if you're learning foreign languages, what that means is you want to bring the foreign language opportunities into your perception so that you're bouncing off of it and back and interacting with it in a way so that you create a world where foreign languages are a common occurrence and there's something that bring you joy and there's something that come into your life. And yeah, if you can do that, it's so easy to learn foreign languages. So I hope that helps and good luck with your studies.